I never imagined my entire existence would crumble to dust between baskets of organic vegetables and the smell of artisan bread at the Blue Ridge Community Farmers Market. That's where everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be a carefully constructed lie, and where a stranger with trembling hands would hand me proof that my only son had been buried alive while I went on believing he was conquering the world. My name is Edward Harrison, and I'm 66 years old. I've lived a life that's seen both glory and tragedy, the kind that marks you permanently and changes how you see everything around you. My family built our ranch in the Shenandoah Hills 4 generations ago, and those mountains have witnessed every important moment of the Harrison legacy. But nothing, absolutely nothing in all those years prepared me for what I'm about to tell you. When Rose died 3 years ago, she took a piece of my soul with her. 40 years of marriage, of building a life together, of raising our boy Brandon, all of it just gone in a moment. The doctors said it was heart failure, sudden and unexpected, though Rose had always been healthy as a horse. She was only 63. After she passed, our ranch became something of a mausoleum for me, every corner holding a memory that hurt to look at. The only thing that kept me going, the only light in all that darkness, was knowing that Brandon was out there making us proud. See, according to what I'd been told, my son had become this incredible international businessman. His wife, Savannah, would send me messages almost daily with updates about his travels. Brandon closed a multi-million-dollar deal in Hong Kong, she'd say. Brandon's giving a presentation to investors in Dubai. Brandon's negotiating partnerships in Tokyo. She'd send me photos of exotic locations, documents with impressive-looking letterheads, even short video messages where Brandon would wave at the camera from what looked like luxury hotels in cities I'd only seen in movies. I held on to those messages like a drowning man holds on to driftwood. After losing Rose, knowing that Brandon was successful, that he was living the dream we'd always talked about, that made the loneliness bearable, I'd sit on the porch where Rose used to take her evening tea, and I'd look at those photos on my phone, imagining my boy in all those faraway places, making the Harrison name mean something in the world. Savannah would bring my grandchildren, Cooper and Maya, to visit every few weeks. She'd talk about how hard Brandon was working, how much he missed us but couldn't get away because of his demanding schedule, how proud he was of providing such a good life for his family. I believed every single word because I desperately needed to believe that something good had come from all the pain. I needed to believe my son was thriving. For 1,070 days, I lived inside that beautiful fantasy. I'd wake up each morning and check my phone for updates. I'd tell the folks at the market about Brandon's latest adventure. I'd show anyone who'd listen the photos of my successful son living his best life across the globe. Everyone in Blue Ridge knew Edward Harrison's boy was making it big in international business. That cold October morning started like any other. I drove my old pickup into town for the Saturday farmers market, something I'd been doing for decades. It was my routine, my way of staying connected to the community that had held me up after Rose died. I was examining pumpkins, trying to pick out the best ones for the pies I planned to make using Rose's recipe, when this young man materialized beside me wearing a delivery company vest. He looked pale, almost sick, like he'd seen something that haunted him. His hands were shaking when he approached me, and there was this desperate look in his eyes that I didn't understand at first. He asked if I was Edward Harrison, if I was Brandon's father. When I nodded yes, wondering how this stranger knew my son, he shoved a yellow envelope into my hands with such urgency that I almost dropped it. The kid told me he couldn't carry this weight any more, that I deserved to know the truth. Before I could even process what was happening or ask what he meant, he disappeared into the crowd of Saturday shoppers. I stood there holding this envelope, my heart starting to pound with a dread I couldn't name yet. Something about the way that young man looked at me, the fear and guilt in his eyes, told me that whatever was inside this envelope was going to change everything. I made it back to the ranch, though I honestly don't remember the drive. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set the envelope on the kitchen table. That same solid oak table where generations of Harrisons had shared meals and celebrated holidays and made important decisions. I stared at it for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, afraid to open it, knowing somehow that once I did, I could never unknow what was inside. When I finally tore it open, the photograph that fell out stole the breath right from my lungs. It was Brandon, but not the Brandon from Savannah's photos. This Brandon was a skeleton with eyes sunk deep into his skull, a wild beard covering his face, holding up a local newspaper from last March. The date on that newspaper hit me like a physical blow, because it was from 6 months ago, and according to Savannah, Brandon had been in Singapore that week closing a major deal. But the worst part, the thing that made my stomach turn and my hand shake, was the background of the photo. Brandon wasn't in some luxury hotel or corporate office. He was in what looked like a hospital room, but the windows had bars on them, and you could see the edges of reinforced doors, the kind they use in psychiatric facilities. My son looked like he'd been through hell, and the expression on his face was one of complete desperation. The letter attached to the photo was from the delivery guy, whose name was Dylan Reed. He explained that his delivery route took him past a place called Pine Crest regularly. He'd describe it as a rehabilitation clinic about 30 minutes from my ranch, just off the main highway. Dylan had seen Brandon through a reinforced window during one of his deliveries, and something about the way my son looked, the way he was being treated, it didn't sit right with Dylan. Dylan wrote that he'd started asking questions, being careful not to draw attention. What he discovered made him sick to his stomach. Brandon wasn't there as a patient receiving care. He was being held there against his will. Dylan managed to get that photo to Brandon during a delivery, and Brandon had written a message on the back that I'd been too shocked to notice at first. I flipped the photo over with trembling hands. In Brandon's handwriting, barely legible like he'd written it in a hurry, were the words, "Dad, Savannah did this. I never left Virginia. Please help me. I'm not sick. She's keeping me here. I love you." The world tilted sideways. I had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. My son had never left the state. He'd never been to Hong Kong or Dubai or Tokyo. Every message, every photo, every video for the past 3 years had been a lie. While I'd been showing off pictures of Brandon's success to my neighbors, my boy had been locked away like a prisoner just 30 minutes down the road. Before I continue, I'm really curious. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're finding value in this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep sharing these experiences with all of you. The next part of Dylan's letter explained what he'd managed to piece together. 24 hours after Brandon supposedly left for his first international business trip, Savannah had him admitted to Pine Crest. She'd filed paperwork claiming Brandon had suffered a massive stroke that left him cognitively impaired, unable to make decisions for himself, dangerous to himself and others. With those documents and a cooperative doctor, she'd gotten herself appointed as Brandon's legal guardian with complete control over his medical care, his finances, his entire life. Dylan wrote that he'd watched the place for weeks, seen how Brandon was kept isolated, how visitors were turned away, how the staff treated him more like an inmate than a patient. He'd managed to slip Brandon that camera phone during a delivery, and Brandon had taken that single photo with the newspaper to prove when and where he was. Dylan had risked his job to get it to me because he said his own father had dementia, and he couldn't imagine someone doing this to a parent, trapping them in ignorance while their child suffered. I sat at that table as the afternoon light faded, reading and rereading every word, studying that photo of my boy looking like a ghost. 3 years. For 3 years, Brandon had been locked away while Savannah played the devoted wife, bringing my grandchildren to visit, spinning stories about Brandon's exciting career, all while keeping him drugged and imprisoned just down the road. The cruelty of it was so vast I couldn't wrap my mind around it. That evening, Savannah showed up at the ranch with Cooper and Maya like she did most weekends. I'd texted her earlier saying I wanted to see the kids, needing to act normal while my mind raced with what to do next. Watching her walk through my door, smiling and cheerful, asking how I was doing, making small talk about the weather and the kids' school activities, it took everything in me not to grab her and demand answers. But something was different this time. Savannah hadn't come alone. She'd brought her sister Rebecca, who she introduced as being there to help with the kids. I'd met Rebecca a handful of times over the years at family gatherings. She'd always seemed nice enough, quiet and supportive, the kind of person who fades into the background. Rose had never quite warmed to her, though, had always said something about Rebecca felt off, though she could never put her finger on what exactly. Rebecca hugged me when she came in, expressing sympathy about how hard things must be without Rose and Brandon around. She said she'd been helping Savannah manage everything, that it was important for family to stick together during difficult times. The way she said it, the way she looked at me with such practiced concern, it suddenly clicked in my mind. This wasn't just Savannah's crime. Rebecca was part of it too. They stayed for dinner, the four of them acting like a normal family. Cooper and Maya chattering about school while Savannah and Rebecca made conversation about nothing important. I played along, the grieving grandfather grateful for the company, while inside I was calculating every move. After the kids went to play in the yard, Savannah brought up needing to update some documents related to the ranch. Rebecca nodded along, supportive as always, suggesting it was smart to have everything in order given my age and the complexity of managing the property alone. That's when I understood the full scope of what they'd planned. This wasn't just about controlling Brandon. They were setting up to take everything, the ranch, the land that had been in my family for generations, the assets Rose and I had built over 40 years, They were going to declare me incompetent next, lock me away just like Brandon, and seize it all. After they left that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, touching things that had belonged to Rose, feeling like I'd failed her, failed Brandon, failed everything we'd built. But then I remembered something. Rose wasn't just my wife. Before she retired and we moved to the ranch full-time, Rose Harrison had served in military intelligence. She'd been part of operations I still didn't fully understand, had clearances and connections that she'd maintained even after leaving active duty. I went to her jewelry box, the rosewood one her mother had given her, and found the small bronze key she'd hidden in a false bottom. I remembered Rose telling me once, years ago, that if anything ever happened to her, I should check Box 247 at Blue Ridge National Bank. At the time, I'd thought it was just Rose being paranoid, her military training making her overly cautious. Now I understood she'd been protecting us. The next morning, I was at the bank when it opened. Box 247 contained documents I'd never seen before. Rose had set up an irrevocable trust that protected the ranch, accounts in offshore banks that I didn't even know existed, and a file folder filled with papers and photographs. At the top of the stack was a letter addressed to me in Rose's handwriting, dated 3 days before she died. Rose's letter started with an apology. She wrote that she hadn't wanted to worry me, but she'd started noticing things about Savannah that concerned her. Small inconsistencies in stories, financial irregularities, the way Savannah asked too many questions about the ranch's value and our estate planning. Rose's training had kicked in, and she'd started investigating. What she'd found terrified her. The letter explained that Savannah wasn't who she claimed to be. Her background, her family history, even her education, it was all fabricated. Rose had traced Savannah back to a series of similar situations. Women who'd married into wealthy families and then systematically isolated and destroyed their husbands while draining the family assets. The pattern was clear and deliberate. Savannah was a professional predator. But the line that made my blood run cold was at the end of the letter. Rose wrote that Savannah wasn't working alone, that I needed to investigate Rebecca, because the two sisters had done this before. And then the final line, "Edward, if you're reading this, I fear I may have pushed too hard, asked too many questions. If something happens to me, please don't believe it was natural causes. Protect Brandon. Protect yourself. I love you always." I sat in that bank vault with my wife's letter shaking in my hands, and a horrible realization crashed over me. Rose hadn't died of heart failure. They'd killed her. Savannah and Rebecca had murdered my wife because she'd discovered their scheme. And 3 days after Rose died, they'd made their move on Brandon, getting him out of the way so they could work on me without interference. The grief and rage that flooded through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. But I forced myself to think clearly, to channel Rose's strategic mind. I couldn't just storm into Pinecrest or confront Savannah. They had lawyers, they had documentation, they had 3 years of establishing their narrative. I needed help from someone who understood how to fight this kind of corruption. In Rose's file was a business card for Marcus Webb, a man she described as a retired federal prosecutor who owed her favors from their time working together in military intelligence. I called the number, not expecting it to still be good after all these years. But Marcus answered on the second ring. When I told him who I was, and that Rose had died 3 years ago, there was a long silence. Then Marcus said that Rose had called him 2 days before she died, that she'd said if anything happened to her, I would need help, and that he should believe everything I told him. Marcus came to the ranch that same afternoon. He was a man in his 70s, sharp-eyed and direct, moving with a kind of purpose that reminded me of Rose. I laid out everything, showed him Dylan's photo, Rose's letter, the documents from the safety deposit box. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the full picture emerged. He made a phone call right there from my kitchen table, and an hour later, another man arrived. This was Caleb Stone, someone Marcus introduced as former FBI, who specialized in complex financial crimes and conspiracy cases. Caleb had the kind of intensity that made you believe he could see through walls if he needed to. Between Marcus's legal expertise and Caleb's investigative skills, they began to build a case. The first thing Caleb did was pull Rose's autopsy report and medical records. He had connections at the state medical examiner's office, and he called in favors to have Rose's tissue samples, which had been preserved, retested with modern equipment. What they found confirmed Rose's fears. Trace amounts of a rare beta blocker, the kind that could mimic heart attack symptoms, showed up in concentrations that proved she'd been poisoned slowly over several months. My wife had been murdered in her own home, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too blind to see it happening. Caleb then turned his attention to Brandon's situation at Pine Crest. He sent an associate to pose as a potential client touring the facility, and what they discovered made the place sound less like a medical center and more like a prison for the wealthy. Pine Crest specialized in long-term care for patients whose families wanted them quietly managed and controlled. The admission papers Savannah had filed claimed Brandon had suffered severe brain damage, was violent and unpredictable, required constant sedation and supervision. All lies, but lies backed up by a doctor willing to sign whatever papers Savannah needed. That doctor was Montgomery Ashford, Pine Crest's medical director. Caleb started digging into Ashford's background and found a pattern of questionable practices, families complaining about loved ones being held longer than necessary, suspicious financial arrangements. But what Caleb discovered next hit me like a sledgehammer. Cooper, my 6-year-old grandson, wasn't Brandon's biological son. DNA results that Caleb obtained through means I probably shouldn't ask about proved that Cooper's biological father was Dr. Montgomery Ashford himself. The timeline made horrific sense. Savannah had gotten pregnant with Ashford's child, then quickly pushed for marriage to Brandon. She'd used the pregnancy and Cooper's birth to bind herself to the Harrison family, to gain legal standing and legitimacy. The whole thing had been a setup from the beginning. I thought about little Cooper, innocent in all of this, and my heart broke. That boy called Brandon Daddy, loved him completely, had no idea the man he thought was his father had been taken from him by the woman he called Mommy. And Maya, sweet 9-year-old Maya, she'd been living in a house with a monster, watching her mother and aunt plot and scheme, absorbing trauma she'd carry forever. But Caleb wasn't finished. He started examining the ranch's finances, and that's when we discovered my own accountant, Gerald Thompson, had been stealing from me. Gerald had managed the Harrison family books for 15 years, someone Rose and I had trusted completely. Caleb found evidence of systematic embezzlement, almost $500,000 diverted into accounts linked to shell companies. And those shell companies traced back to Rebecca. The pattern became clear. Gerald had been creating documentation that made me look financially irresponsible, moving money around in ways that suggested confusion or early dementia. They were building a case to have me declared incompetent, just like they'd done to Brandon. Once they controlled both of us, the ranch and everything we owned would be theirs. It was methodical, patient, and absolutely ruthless. Then Caleb uncovered something that made me physically ill. Dylan Reed, the delivery driver who'd helped Brandon get that photo to me, he hadn't died in an accident like the news had reported. Caleb found evidence that Rebecca had been in the parking lot where Dylan's car was found with failed brakes. Security footage showed her near his vehicle. They'd killed that brave young man for trying to help us, just like they'd killed Rose for asking too many questions. I was living in a nightmare, surrounded by murderers who smiled at my table and hugged my grandchildren. But Marcus and Caleb were building an airtight case. They had forensic evidence of Rose's poisoning. They had proof of Dylan's murder. They had documentation of the financial fraud. They had DNA proving Cooper wasn't Brandon's biological child and establishing Ashford's connection to the conspiracy. What they needed now was direct evidence of Savannah and Rebecca's involvement, their own words condemning them. Marcus suggested we set a trap. He said people like Savannah and Rebecca, they got confident after getting away with things for so long. They'd killed twice, imprisoned Brandon, stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, and suffered no consequences. That kind of success made criminals cocky and careless. If we gave them what looked like an easy win, they might reveal themselves. So I started acting confused. Not dramatically, just small things. I'd forget what day it was when Savannah visited. I'd ask the same question twice in a conversation. I'd mention trouble managing the ranch's bills, worry about having enough money. Savannah's eyes would light up when I showed these signs, and Rebecca would exchange these knowing glances with her sister. They thought their plan was working, that I was naturally declining, and they just needed to wait a bit longer. Then I told Savannah I wanted to update my will and estate planning. I said I needed to make sure everything was organized, that I wanted Savannah to take care of things since Brandon was too busy with work to manage it, and I was getting older. The lie tasted like acid in my mouth, but Savannah practically glowed with triumph. Rebecca suggested they come over on a Friday evening to go through everything, said she'd bring her own lawyer friend to help make sure all the documents were proper. That Friday evening, Marcus and Caleb had the entire house wired, cameras hidden in smoke detectors, microphones in the light fixtures, recording equipment that would capture every word spoken in any room. I left the study door unlocked and went to bed early, telling Savannah and Rebecca I was too tired to focus, but they should feel free to review any documents they needed. Then I went upstairs to a guest room where Marcus and Caleb waited with monitors showing every angle of my study. We watched as Savannah and Rebecca went through my desk, my files, laughing and celebrating their impending victory. Rebecca found the ranch's deed and held it up like a trophy. Savannah opened the safe using a combination she must have watched me enter at some point, pulling out insurance documents and bank information. They were so confident, so sure they'd won. That's when Savannah started talking about Rose. She said she was actually glad the old woman was gone because Rose had been getting suspicious, asking too many questions about Savannah's background, requesting financial records that were none of her business. Rebecca laughed and said the beta blocker had worked perfectly, that Rose never suspected her evening tea was being doctored night after night. She described how she'd volunteered to make Rose's tea during her visits, how easy it was to add just a little bit of poison each time until Rose's heart finally gave out. Savannah said the best part was watching me grieve, watching me cling to the fantasy that Brandon was successful in traveling the world. She described it as poetic justice, that Brandon had figured out she was cheating with Montgomery Ashford, had confronted her about Cooper's paternity, and threatened to expose everything. So she'd arranged his convenient accident on the stairs, and when that didn't kill him, she'd used his injuries to have him committed. She talked about visiting him at Pine Crest sometimes just to watch him drugged and helpless, to see the recognition and hatred in his eyes when he knew it was her but couldn't do anything about it. Rebecca mentioned Dylan Reed, said it was unfortunate he'd gotten involved, but necessary to protect their operation. She described tampering with his brakes as casually as someone might talk about running an errand. Then they discussed me, debating how long to wait before having me declared incompetent, whether they should stage another accident or just let me deteriorate naturally. Savannah thought 6 more months, just to make sure everything looked legitimate to the courts. I watched this on Marcus's monitors with tears running down my face, hearing my wife's murderers laugh about killing her, hearing them plot my son's continued imprisonment, hearing them discuss my own upcoming destruction. But Marcus put his hand on my shoulder and reminded me that every word was now evidence that would put them away forever. The trap had worked perfectly. We had everything we needed, but Marcus said we needed to move carefully because Savannah had established legal guardianship over Brandon, and any challenge to that would alert her. We needed to secure Brandon's freedom and safety before we made any moves against Savannah and Rebecca. So Caleb reached out to his federal contacts, and through a complex series of legal maneuvers involving FBI jurisdiction over Pine Crest for potential civil rights violations, they managed to get a federal judge to issue an emergency order transferring Brandon to a federal medical facility for evaluation. The look on Dr. Montgomery Ashford's face when federal agents arrived at Pine Crest must have been priceless, according to Caleb, who was there. They removed Brandon immediately, along with files documenting 17 other patients being held under questionable circumstances. The whole facility was basically a kidnapping operation disguised as medical care. Wealthy families having inconvenient relatives disappeared with legal documentation, while their assets were plundered. Brandon spent 2 weeks at the federal facility being evaluated by real doctors who confirmed what we already knew. He'd never had a stroke. He'd suffered a head injury from his fall down the stairs, which had been deliberately caused by Savannah pushing him, but there was no lasting cognitive damage. He'd been kept heavily sedated at Pine Crest, given medications he didn't need that kept him disoriented and compliant, maintained in an artificial state of helplessness. When Brandon was finally clear-headed enough to give a full statement, the story he told was horrifying. He described 3 years of being conscious, but unable to control his own body, knowing where he was and what was being done to him, but powerless to stop it. He talked about being strapped to beds, about forced medications, about the psychological torture of hearing staff members discuss his case like he wasn't there or couldn't understand. He'd tried to fight, tried to resist, tried to communicate with anyone who might help. But Pinecrest's staff were well trained in keeping patients subdued and silent. The only light in Brandon's captivity had been Dylan Reed, who'd noticed something was wrong and started slipping Brandon extra food, sometimes reducing his medication doses when staff wasn't watching, finally getting him that camera phone so he could take that one photograph that changed everything. Brandon said Dylan was a hero who'd paid with his life for trying to do the right thing. While Brandon recovered, Marcus and Caleb built the criminal case. They brought in the FBI, state prosecutors, even the Virginia Attorney General's office. What had started as one family's tragedy had uncovered a massive conspiracy. They arrested Dr. Montgomery Ashford first, confronting him with evidence of his relationship with Savannah, his fathering of Cooper, his systematic imprisonment of patients for financial gain. Faced with spending the rest of his life in prison, Ashford agreed to testify against Savannah and Rebecca in exchange for a reduced sentence. They arrested Gerald Thompson next, my trusted accountant, who'd been embezzling funds and creating false records to make me look incompetent. Gerald broke down immediately when confronted with the evidence, admitted everything, and also agreed to testify. The conspiracy was unraveling person by person. Hey, quick pause here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment telling me your location. It's always amazing to see this community from all over the world, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your support means everything and helps me continue telling stories that matter. The day they arrested Savannah and Rebecca, I was there watching from an unmarked car with Marcus. Federal agents arrived at Savannah's house while she was having breakfast with Cooper and Maya. I'd insisted that child services be there to take the kids immediately to a safe place because I didn't want them traumatized by seeing their mother arrested, but Marcus said the children needed to be removed from the scene before Savannah realized what was happening. Cooper and Maya were escorted out first, confused and scared, taken by social workers who were gentle and kind, but firm. Then the agents went inside. Through the window, I could see Savannah's expression change from confusion to understanding to rage. She knew she'd been caught. Rebecca was arrested at her apartment at the same time, and her reaction was apparently more subdued, resigned even, like she'd always known this day might come. The trial was a media sensation. The beautiful young wife who'd imprisoned her husband and murdered her mother-in-law, the sister who'd helped kill and embezzle, the corrupt doctor who'd fathered a child with his co-conspirator, the accountant who'd helped steal from a grieving widower. Every day brought new revelations as Ashford and Thompson testified, as evidence was presented, as the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. Savannah's defense tried to paint her as a victim of Ashford's manipulation, tried to claim she'd been coerced or threatened. But the recordings from my study destroyed that narrative. There was nothing coerced about Savannah laughing while describing how she enjoyed watching Brandon suffer. Nothing forced about her casually discussing my planned elimination. The jury watched those videos with expressions of disgust and disbelief. Rebecca's defense tried to blame everything on Savannah, to present Rebecca as merely a loyal sister who'd gotten in over her head. But the evidence showed Rebecca had been an equal partner in every decision. She'd personally administered the poison that killed Rose, had murdered Dylan Reed, had helped embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars. She was every bit as guilty as her sister. The hardest part of the trial was when Maya testified. My 9-year-old granddaughter had kept a diary where she'd recorded strange things she'd overheard her mother and aunt discussing. Maya didn't understand what the conversations meant, but she'd written them down in her careful child's handwriting because something about the way her mother talked scared her. Those diary entries corroborated everything else, provided innocent documentation of conversations Savannah and Rebecca thought were private. Maya's testimony about hearing her mother say that Grandpa would soon sleep forever, like Grandma Rose, about writing that down because it made her worried, that broke the courtroom. Several jurors were crying as this brave little girl described living in a house where she sensed danger but didn't understand it, where she loved her mother but feared her at the same time. Brandon testified, too, describing his 3 years of imprisonment in vivid, painful detail. He talked about the first months when he'd fought and struggled, refusing to believe Savannah could really do this to him. He described the gradual breakdown of his hope as months became a year, then 2 years, then 3. He talked about the medications that turned his mind foggy, about the restraints and isolation, about the psychological torture of being conscious but helpless. But the most powerful part of Brandon's testimony was when he talked about Cooper. He said that even though he'd learned Cooper wasn't biologically his son, that changed nothing about how he felt. He'd been there when Cooper was born, had changed diapers, and stayed up through sleepless nights, had taught that boy to ride a bike and tie his shoes. Biology didn't make someone a father. Love and commitment and daily choice made someone a father. Cooper was his son, period. The verdicts came back unanimously guilty on all counts. Savannah was convicted of first-degree murder for Rose's poisoning, kidnapping for Brandon's imprisonment, attempted murder for pushing Brandon down the stairs, conspiracy to commit fraud, and half a dozen other charges. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life with no possibility of parole. Rebecca received 22 years for her role in Rose's murder, for killing Dylan Reed, for conspiracy and fraud. Her slightly lighter sentence acknowledged that Savannah had been the primary architect of the plan, but the judge made clear that Rebecca's participation had been voluntary and eager, that she'd personally committed murder multiple times, and that she deserved severe punishment. Dr. Montgomery Ashford got 15 years as part of his plea agreement. Gerald Thompson received 10 years, and Pine Crest was shut down permanently, its assets seized to compensate the 17 victims who'd been imprisoned there. Several of those families filed their own lawsuits, and more criminal investigations were opened into everyone involved with that horrible place. But the final twist, the moment that brought me both pain and unexpected grace, came after the verdicts. Cooper was 6 years old enough to understand that his mother had gone away for doing very bad things, old enough to know that something fundamental had changed in his life. The social worker brought Cooper to the ranch to talk with Brandon and me about his future, about what would happen to him now. Cooper was scared. That much was obvious. He kept asking if he was in trouble, if he'd done something wrong, if we were going to send him away. Brandon knelt down to Cooper's eye level, and I watched my son, who'd been through hell, show strength I didn't know he still possessed. Brandon told Cooper that none of this was his fault, that sometimes adults made terrible choices, but that didn't change how much we loved him. Then Cooper asked the question that broke both our hearts. He wanted to know if Brandon was still his daddy, or if, now that everyone knew the truth about who his biological father was, he had to go live with Dr. Ashford. The fear in that little boy's voice, the idea that he might lose the only father he'd ever known, it was devastating. Brandon pulled Cooper into a hug and told him that blood didn't determine family, that love determined family. He said he'd been Cooper's father from the moment Cooper was born, had been there for every scraped knee and bedtime story, and that would never change regardless of DNA. Cooper was his son today, tomorrow, and forever, if Cooper wanted that. Cooper burst into tears and clung to Brandon, saying he didn't want any other daddy, that Brandon was his real daddy and always would be. I stood there watching my son comfort his non-biological child with such fierce love, and I understood something profound about what family really meant. Savannah had tried to use biology as a weapon, had tried to contaminate our family with lies and manipulation, but she'd failed to understand that the bonds we choose are stronger than the bonds we inherit. We petitioned the court for Brandon to legally adopt Cooper, formalizing what had always been true in our hearts. Maya, who'd been our unintentional hero with her careful diary, came to live with us too. She'd been taken into foster care initially, but it became clear she needed to be with family who loved her. Despite everything her mother had done, Maya was innocent, and she deserved a chance to heal in a safe place with people who would protect her. Those first few months were hard on all of us. Brandon was physically weak from 3 years of forced sedation and confinement. He had nightmares, moments of panic when he felt trapped or controlled. Therapy helped, slowly, but the psychological scars ran deep. Some days he'd wake up disoriented, not sure if he was free or if this was another dream he'd have to wake from back in that facility. Cooper struggled with understanding why his mommy had hurt people, why she wasn't coming back, how to reconcile the mother who'd made him lunch and tucked him in at night with the monster everyone said she was. He had therapy too, gentle sessions with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, helping him process complex adult betrayal through a child's framework of understanding. Maya blamed herself for a long time. She'd think that if she'd told someone about the things she'd written in her diary, maybe Grandma Rose wouldn't have died. Maybe Daddy Brandon wouldn't have suffered so long. We told her again and again that she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd actually saved us by keeping that diary. But survivor's guilt is a powerful thing even for a 9-year-old. As for me, I was grieving Rose all over again, but in a different way. Before, I'd grieved a death I thought was natural, tragic, but inevitable. Now, I grieved a murder, a deliberate theft of someone I loved. I'd mourned her loss, but also found comfort in memories of our life together. Now, those memories were tainted by knowledge that her final months had been poisoned both literally and figuratively, that she died knowing danger was circling her family and being unable to fully protect us from it. But Rose had protected us in the end. Her careful documentation, her hidden safety deposit box, her maintained connections with people like Marcus Webb who could fight this kind of corruption, all of that had given us the tools we needed to find justice. She'd seen the threat and prepared for it even though it cost her life. That was the kind of person Rose Harrison had been, someone who faced danger to protect the people she loved. The ranch became our healing place. Brandon slowly regained his strength, spending hours working the land like he'd done as a boy, finding peace in physical labor and the rhythm of seasons. Koopa discovered a love for the horses we kept, spending mornings in the barn learning to care for them, finding something steady and uncomplicated in their presence. Maya started writing, processing her experiences through stories and journals, showing a gift for observation and expression that reminded me of Rose. About a year after the trial, we held a memorial service for Dylan Reed. His mother came, a quiet woman worn down by grief, but grateful that her son's death hadn't been meaningless. We planted a tree on the ranch property in Dylan's honor, a strong oak that would grow for generations. And we told his mother that Dylan had saved our family, that his courage in helping Brandon get that photo to me had broken open the conspiracy. She cried, and we cried with her, mourning a young man who'd done the right thing and paid the ultimate price. We also established a foundation in Dylan's name to help families dealing with wrongful guardianship and elder abuse. The money recovered from Savannah, Rebecca, and Gerald's criminal enterprise, along with the settlement from Pinecrest's dissolved assets, provided initial funding. The Dylan Reed Justice Foundation now helps other families trapped in situations like ours, providing legal resources, investigation assistance, and advocacy for people who've been imprisoned or exploited by corrupt guardianship systems. Time didn't heal everything, but it softened the sharp edges. Brandon learned to sleep through most nights without nightmares. Koopa stopped asking when his mommy was coming home and started just calling Brandon his dad without qualifiers or explanations. Maya's writing developed into something beautiful, and she talked about maybe writing a book someday to help other kids who'd lived through family trauma. I turned 69 last month. Brandon is 37 now, Cooper is 9, and Maya just turned 12. We sit together on the porch most evenings, the same porch where Rose used to take her tea, and we watch the sunset over the Shenandoah Mountains. Those mountains have seen generations of Harrison's weather storms and celebrate triumphs, and now they're witnessing our recovery from the worst betrayal imaginable. Sometimes Cooper asks me about Rose, wanting to know about the grandmother he barely remembers. I tell him about her strength, her intelligence, her dedication to protecting the people she loved. I tell him that Rose would have loved him fiercely, that she died trying to keep our family safe, and that her memory lives on in how we choose to live now with integrity and courage. Maya wants to know about forgiveness, asks if I'll ever forgive her mother for what she did. I'm honest with her. I tell her that forgiveness is complicated, that I can acknowledge Savannah loved her in whatever broken way she was capable of loving, while also recognizing that Savannah made choices that destroyed lives. I tell Maya she doesn't have to forgive her mother to move forward with her own life, that healing doesn't require excusing evil actions. Brandon rarely talks about Savannah at all. When he does, it's with a kind of distant sadness, like remembering a natural disaster he survived. He says sometimes he still can't believe he married someone capable of such cruelty, that he looks back at their courtship and early marriage trying to spot red flags he missed. But mostly he focuses forward on building a life with his kids, on repairing his relationship with me, on becoming whole again after 3 years of being broken down. The legal aftermath continues even now. Multiple families affected by Pinecrest's corruption have filed civil suits. Investigations uncovered networks of corrupt doctors, lawyers, and guardians who'd made careers out of exploiting vulnerable people and their families. Our case became the example that broke open a much larger scandal, forcing reforms in how guardianship and long-term care facilities are monitored and regulated. I testified before state legislature committees about what happened to our family, advocating for stronger protections and oversight. Brandon testified too, his first-hand account of imprisonment shocking lawmakers who thought such things only happened in fiction or in faraway places, not in their own state. The resulting legislation passed unanimously, creating new layers of review and protection for people under guardianship. But beyond the legal victories and systemic reforms, the real triumph has been watching my family rebuild itself on foundations of truth and chosen commitment. Cooper will grow up knowing that family is defined by love and daily presence, not by biology or legal documents. Maya will grow up understanding that secrets can be poisonous, that speaking truth even when you're scared is an act of courage, that recording what you observe can save lives. And Brandon, my son who survived hell and came back to us, he's teaching me that resilience isn't about not being broken. It's about deciding to live fully despite being broken, to love courageously after betrayal, to trust again after being destroyed by trust misplaced. Every morning he gets up, takes care of his kids, works the ranch, and chooses to build rather than to destroy. That's a victory over Savannah's attempt to erase him. I lost Rose to evil I didn't recognize until too late. I lost 3 years of Brandon's life to corruption I was too trusting to see. I lost time with my grandchildren that can never be recovered, watched them live in a house with a murderer while I remained ignorant just miles away. Those losses haunt me, particularly in the quiet hours when sleep won't come and I replay the signs I should have noticed. But I gained something too, something Savannah and Rebecca could never understand no matter how many families they destroyed. I gained absolute certainty about what family means. It's not about blood relationships or financial inheritance or maintaining appearances. It's about fighting for each other when the fight seems impossible. It's about choosing to love people even after discovering they're not biologically yours. It's about believing someone when they say they need help, even when the people claiming to speak for them insist everything's fine. Cooper turned 9 last month, and for his birthday he asked if we could visit Dylan Reed's memorial tree. We walked out there together, the 4 of us, and Cooper put his hand on the oak's trunk. He told the tree thank you for helping his daddy come home. Told it that he was trying to be brave like Dylan had been brave. That moment, watching this child who'd been used as a tool in a conspiracy honor the memory of a stranger who died trying to help him, that's when I knew we were going to be okay. We still have hard days. Brandon sometimes gets quiet and distant, his mind back in that facility reliving trauma. Cooper sometimes worries that people he loves will disappear, struggles with attachment and fear of loss. Maya has nightmares where she's trying to warn people of danger, but no one can hear her voice. And I carry guilt that maybe if I'd been less trusting, less willing to believe the easy story, I might have seen the danger sooner. but we face those hard days together. We talk about our feelings and fears instead of hiding them. We remind each other that surviving requires honesty, even when honesty is painful. We hold each other accountable for healing, for not letting trauma define us or limit us or turn us into bitter, closed-off versions of ourselves. The ranch will pass to Brandon and eventually to Cooper and Maya, not because of legal documents or bloodlines, but because we've chosen each other as family. This land will remain Harrison land, not because of what's written on a deed, but because we've defended it, we've bled for it, we've refused to let evil people steal our heritage and history. Last week, I received a letter from Savannah. She's allowed limited correspondence from prison, and she wrote to say she knows I must hate her, that she's sorry for the pain she caused, that she hopes someday I might forgive her. The letter felt hollow, performative, probably written to show a parole board whenever she becomes eligible decades from now. I haven't responded, and I don't plan to. Some apologies are too small for the crimes committed, some forgiveness too large a burden to carry. Rebecca wrote too, a longer letter trying to explain how she'd gotten involved with Savannah's schemes, how she'd convinced herself they weren't really hurting anyone, how she never meant for things to go so far. I read her letter and felt nothing but emptiness. These explanations and justifications from people who'd murdered my wife and imprisoned my son, they meant nothing. Actions speak louder than words, and their actions had screamed evil for years. So if you're asking whether this story has a happy ending, I'd say it has a true ending instead. Truth isn't always happy. We carry scars. We're marked by what happened. Cooper will always know his biological father was a criminal who conspired to imprison the man who actually raised him. Maya will always carry the weight of having documented her mother's crimes in a diary, even though that documentation saved us. Brandon will always have nightmares about being trapped and powerless. And I'll always live with the knowledge that Rose died trying to warn me about danger I was too blind to see. But truth is still better than the beautiful lies we were living before. Truth gives us solid ground to build on. Truth lets us make informed choices. Truth allows for real love instead of love based on manipulation and deception. When I sit on this porch with my son and grandchildren, I know exactly who they are, and they know exactly who I am. There are no secrets, no hidden agendas, no schemes being plotted behind friendly smiles. We're here in Blue Ridge, in the Shenandoah Mountains, on land that's been Harrison land for 4 generations, and we're surviving. More than surviving, we're living with intention and awareness and fierce protective love for each other. Rose's memory isn't tainted anymore. Now, when I think of her, I remember her strength, her strategic mind, her willingness to investigate when something felt wrong, her preparation for protecting us even after her death. She was a warrior until the end. Dylan Reed's sacrifice wasn't in vain. He saved us, and through the foundation bearing his name, he continues saving other families trapped in corrupt systems. That young delivery driver who could have looked away, who could have decided it wasn't his problem, instead chose courage and paid for it with his life. He's a hero in every sense that matters. And Brandon, my son, who I thought was conquering the world while he was actually fighting for survival just down the road, he's home. He's free. He's rebuilding his life with determination and grace. He's being the father Cooper and Maya need. He's teaching them that strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about choosing to get up after being knocked down again and again and again. So that's my story. That's how an envelope at a farmer's market destroyed the fantasy I'd been living and revealed a nightmare I never imagined possible. That's how my family was torn apart by conspiracy and greed and brought back together by truth and courage and chosen love. That's how I learned that justice, while slow and painful, is still possible even against powerful people who think they're untouchable. If there's anything I want you to take from this, it's this. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Don't let yourself be comforted by easy explanations when complexity is staring you in the face. Ask questions, even when asking questions makes you uncomfortable or makes others defensive. And understand that family, real family, is built on truth and choice and daily commitment, not on DNA or legal papers or social expectations. The sun is setting now over the mountains, and Brandon is calling us in for dinner. Cooper is probably setting the table the way Rose taught him through stories I've shared. Maya is probably finishing homework at the kitchen table. It's ordinary and precious and hard-won. It's life after everything tried to destroy us. It's proof that truth, no matter how deeply buried, finds its way to light eventually. And Rose, wherever she is, finally rests in peace, knowing I protected our son, exposed her murderers, and kept the family she loved together. That's all she ever asked of me. And though I was slow to understand, slow to see the danger, slow to act, in the end, I did what she needed me to do. I keep living for her, for Brandon, for Cooper and Maya, for Dylan's memory, and for myself. I keep living because giving up would mean Savannah and Rebecca win, and I'll be damned if I give them that satisfaction. We survived. We're healing, and every sunrise over these mountains is a reminder that we're still here, still together, still fighting, still choosing love over hate. That's our story. That's our truth. And that's how Edward Harrison learned that sometimes the greatest battles we fight are against people wearing friendly faces, and that sometimes the greatest victories are simply waking up the next morning and choosing to live with integrity and courage despite everything that tried to break us.